No one saw it coming. The courtroom in Manhattan fell dead silent when Janice Combs, yes, Diddy's own mother, was escorted to the witness stand. She's 83 years old, and no one had even whispered her name during the trial. Diddy, who had been calm and composed all day, suddenly froze. His lawyers looked rattled. The prosecutors straightened up. Everyone knew this was going to be the moment that changed everything. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe. We bring you the raw, unfiltered truth behind the headlines. And trust us, what happened next? It wasn't in any headline. Nobody expected his mother to take the stand. The tension in that courtroom could cut glass. All eyes locked on Janice as she slowly made her way to the front. She didn't speak. She didn't even look at her son. But when the judge swore her in, the room gasped. Even the judge looked shocked. There had been no warning, no leak. Just the woman who had stood by Diddy through decades of fame, fortune, and now scandal, about to speak under oath. Up until then, Diddy had been acting like he still had control, cracking smiles, whispering with his lawyers. But as his mother sat down, something changed. His face went pale. His confidence disappeared. Because now it wasn't just reporters or ex-employees pointing fingers. This was his mother, and she was about to speak freely. For the first time. And what she said? It wasn't just damaging. It was devastating. The day had started like any other day of the trial. The press was crammed into their usual rows, whispering and waiting. Lawyers were busy swapping last-minute strategies. Then came the bombshell. The United States calls Janice Combs to the stand. You could hear jaws hit the floor. People thought it had to be a mistake, or maybe a desperation move by the prosecution. But Janice walked tall, head high, with the kind of calm that said she wasn't there to play games. The judge raised an eyebrow. Diddy looked like he'd seen a ghost. When she sat down, she still didn't glance at her son. He stared at her, stunned, betrayed, maybe even scared. The prosecutor started gently. "Mrs. Combs, thank you for being here. I know this must be difficult." Janice just nodded, calm, composed, dead serious. Diddy's lawyers jumped in fast, arguing that anything she said would be private, protected, mother-son privilege. But the judge shut it down. No such protection exists when it comes to criminal activity. And just like that, it was on. Reporters stopped typing. Even the court sketch. Artists froze. You could have heard a pin drop. Diddy's family looked confused, panicked. The prosecution, they just waited. Then she spoke. "I've been asked to testify about my son, about conversations we've had, about things I've seen. I'm here because the truth needs to be told." Boom. Right there, the whole case shifted. This wasn't some former assistant trying to sell a book. This wasn't a bitter ex. This was the woman who raised him, defended him, watched him become a billionaire, and now was turning against him. She talked about raising Sean alone after his father was murdered, how she worked multiple jobs to make sure he had everything, how proud she was when he made it big. She smiled, remembering how charismatic he was, even as a kid. "He could talk anyone into anything," she said. But then her face changed. Somewhere along the line, something went wrong. She turned to the jury. Her voice dropped. "Everyone started treating him like he was above the rules. And I think he started to believe it." From there, the story got darker. She described visits to his mansions, places where she was suddenly not allowed to go. Rooms that were always locked, staff who looked scared, girls who seemed drugged or out of it. A Miami party in 2008 stood out the most. I showed up unannounced. "Mothers can do that," she said, earning a few nervous laughs. But what she found wasn't funny. Staff were cleaning up, collecting phones from rooms. A young woman was crying. A security guard was escorting her out. When Diddy saw her there, he exploded. He was furious that I came without calling. Then came the photo. The prosecutor showed her a picture of Diddy's LA pool house. She nodded. That's what he called his studio. But no one was allowed inside, not even me. As the years went on, her concerns grew. She asked questions, tried to intervene, but he'd always brush me off. Tell me I didn't understand. That this was just the lifestyle, that everything was consensual, but it didn't feel right. The prosecutor asked if she'd ever spoken to him about the accusations made by women. She paused, then nodded. Yes, I called him right away. Any mother would. I asked him directly if it was true, and that's where we'll leave it for now. Because what she said next, what she revealed about their private talks, her suspicions, the things she witnessed, it shook the courtroom to its core and might be the final nail in the coffin for one of music's most powerful men. Stay tuned, because the truth isn't just coming out, it's exploding. No one saw it coming. The federal courtroom in Manhattan went completely silent. Every eye turned to the door as 83-year-old Janice Combs, mother of Sean Diddy Combs, was escorted to the witness stand. Diddy, who had seemed calm and collected, up to this point, froze. His lawyers looked stunned. The prosecution straightened up. Everyone knew this moment would change everything. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe. We break the stories others are too scared to touch. And today, Diddy's own mother is about to expose him in front of the entire world. Nobody expected this. The courtroom had already been tense, full of whispers and suspicion. But when Janice Combs, the woman who raised Diddy, walked to the front, without a word or warning, you could hear gasps ripple through the room. Even the judge looked shocked. Until this moment, Diddy had been confidently playing the role, chatting with his legal team, smiling for the cameras. But all that collapsed the second his mother took the stand. Suddenly, this wasn't about lawyers or strategy. This was personal. This was about truth. And the truth hit like a freight train. Janice sat down, not once looking at her son. The prosecutor opened gently. Mrs. Combs, thank you for being here. I know this isn't easy. Janice simply nodded, calm, composed. But what came next shattered everything. She said, I've been asked to talk about my son, about the things I've seen, the things I've heard. And I'm doing it because the truth matters, even when it hurts. Diddy's lawyer jumped up, trying to block it, arguing that family conversations are private. The judge disagreed. Let her speak. And then she did. Janice began softly, describing raising Diddy after his father was killed. She worked multiple jobs. She gave him everything. She was proud of his success, how he rose from intern to billionaire. But then, her tone changed. Somewhere along the way, he changed, she told the jury. Success came fast, too fast. And soon, he believed he was above the rules. She talked about disturbing visits to his homes, young women who looked out of it, staff too afraid to speak, locked rooms she wasn't allowed in anymore. That wasn't how I raised him. One story silenced the room. In 2008, Janice showed up at his Miami home unannounced. The staff were cleaning up after a party, but not like any normal party. Phones were being collected. One woman was crying. When he saw me, he was furious I didn't call first. That's when I knew something was wrong. She pointed out a photo shown by the prosecution, his LA pool house. He called it a studio, but I was never allowed inside. Janice admitted she ignored the signs for years. I wanted to believe him. He's my son. But everything changed in 2023 after Cassie's lawsuit. She confronted him, alone, in his New York apartment. I asked him for the truth. Not what the lawyers told him to say, just the truth. As a mother. Diddy didn't confess everything. But what he said was chilling. Mom, you don't build what I built by playing by the rules. Sometimes people get hurt. That's business. Her voice cracked for the first time. That's not business. That's not right. That's not how I raised him. When the video of Diddy assaulting Cassie came out in early 2024, she called him. He tried to spin it, said it was out of context. But I'd seen that rage before, with staff, with colleagues. That man in the video, I recognized him, and it broke my heart. She spoke of lists she found, women's names, marked with notes like handled or potential problem. When she asked about it, he brushed it off. That's just business, he said. But she saw the truth in his eyes. The prosecutor handed her a document. She said, "These are notes I started keeping because I was afraid my love for my son was blinding me to what he had become." For the first time, Diddy looked up, locked eyes with her. It was a moment no one in the room would forget. A mother and a son divided by truth. She didn't flinch. "I love my son, but I can't lie anymore. Too many people have been hurt, and silence is no longer an option." The prosecutor asked about one last conversation after his arrest in April 2025. She visited him in jail. "I told him I needed the full truth. I said, 'Sean, I love you, but I need to know what I'm standing behind.' His reply, 'I built a world where I made the rules, where people either played along or got pushed aside. Was it right? No. Did people get hurt? Yes. But that's how power works.' She asked about the parties, the drugs, the threats. He didn't deny. "It's complicated," he said. "Everyone wanted in. Everything was consensual at first." Janice's voice was barely a whisper now. I told him, "That's not consent. That's coercion." He replied, "That's not how it works in my world." The courtroom was stunned. Even the defense attorney didn't try to tear her down. His questions were soft, respectful, trying to show she hadn't witnessed the crimes herself, but her message was clear. "I raised my son to be accountable, to be human." And somewhere along the way, he lost that. He stopped seeing people as people, just pieces in his game. I couldn't protect that. I couldn't support that. So I'm here today to tell the truth, because I still love my son. And that's why I had to stop lying for him. As she stepped down, Diddy looked like a different man, not a mogul, not a star, just a son, completely shattered. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence as Janice Combs slowly walked past the defense table. Her steps were slow but sure, her back straight and her dignity unshaken. She didn't look back, but Diddy did. He watched his mother go, and for the first time during the trial, something in his eyes cracked. Of all the shocking things the jury had heard over the past few weeks, it was his mother's words that seemed to hit him the hardest. The masks were off. This was just a mother and her son, and the truth between them couldn't be ignored anymore. Right after Janice's powerful testimony, the prosecution called Dr. Margaret Chen, a respected psychologist who specializes in the mental toll of fame and power on families. Once she explained her background, the prosecutor got straight to the point. What had just happened in that courtroom? Dr. Chen didn't hesitate. "What we witnessed was rare and deeply revealing," she said. "In high-profile cases, family members often stay silent or defend the accused no matter what. For a mother to do what Mrs. Combs did today, that's a seismic break in the usual pattern," she continued. "From a psychological perspective, Mrs. Combs clearly reached what we call a moral tipping point. It's the moment when a person can no longer reconcile love for someone with the harm that person has caused. What makes her testimony even more credible is that her awareness developed slowly over time, not suddenly. That gradual shift suggests deep inner conflict and a long emotional journey." The prosecutor asked Dr. Chen to comment on the disturbing dynamic Janice described. Her son brushing off her concerns, hiding behind business excuses, and acting like normal rules didn't apply to him. "These are classic signs of what we call power insulation," Dr. Chen explained. "When someone becomes extremely rich or famous, They often surround themselves with people who protect them from consequences and feed their belief that they're untouchable. But a mother, especially one who knew him before the fame, can sometimes cut through that. She pointed out that Diddy's reported statement to his mom, "That's how power works," wasn't just a throwaway line. It revealed a worldview shaped by years of enabling and unchecked behavior. Next, the courtroom screens lit up with pages from Janice's private notes dating back to 2008. The prosecutor asked Dr. Chen to analyze them. Dr. Chen scanned the entries. "What stands out," she said, "is that while her interpretation changed over time, the behaviors she described were consistent. Early on, she excused them, blaming stress or pressure from the music industry. But over the years, her tone shifted. She began to see a pattern of control, abuse, and emotional manipulation. She explained how a mother's perspective, especially one who had stood by her son for decades, could offer rare and valuable insight into the person behind the public image. When a loyal family member finally breaks that silence, it can mark a major turning point, not just for the case, but for the defendant's own sense of identity. Throughout Dr. Chen's testimony, Diddy sat quietly, rarely speaking to his lawyers. The usual arrogance was gone. Witnesses described him as emotionally checked out and visibly shaken. The defense tried to fight back, accusing Dr. Chen of making broad assumptions without knowing the family personally. She acknowledged that her views were based on the testimony and notes presented, but stood by her analysis. "These are not random theories. They're patterns we've seen repeatedly in families affected by extreme power and fame." As the court adjourned for a break, the air in the courtroom felt different. Jurors who had seemed emotionally distant earlier were now visibly moved. Some wiped away tears. Others furiously scribbled notes. Everyone felt the weight of a mother turning against her son. During the recess, word leaked out. Diddy wasn't talking. Not to his lawyers, not to anyone. Something had broken. When court resumed, Judge Arun Subramanian addressed the legal teams. "Given this morning's testimony, does either side wish to make any motions?" Diddy's lead attorney stood. "Your Honor, the defense requests a short continuance to speak with our client and reassess our next steps." The prosecution objected, saying the delay could sway the jury and disrupt the flow of the case. After a brief consideration, the judge granted a one-day pause, telling the jury to return at 9 a.m. sharp. Outside, the media frenzy exploded. Headlines screamed, "Mother's testimony rocks Diddy trial." Janice Combs breaks silence against her. Own-son legal analysts across the networks called it a devastating blow to the defense. The next morning, the courtroom was even more crowded, filled with press, public, and curious spectators. But no one was prepared for what happened next. As the judge entered and the jury took their seats, Diddy's attorney rose again. "Your Honor, after lengthy discussion, our client would like to speak directly to the court." The gallery erupted in whispers. The prosecution objected immediately, arguing that Diddy couldn't just speak freely, he had to take the stand, under oath, and face cross-examination. The judge agreed. "Mr. Combs, if you wish to address this court, it must be under oath and subject to cross-examination. Do you understand?" All eyes turned to Diddy. He stood, slower than usual, and said, "Yes, Your Honor, I understand." It was a bombshell. Up until that moment, no one expected Diddy to testify. Most experts believed he'd stay silent to avoid making things worse. But now, everything had changed. He walked to the witness stand, not in one of his flashy suits, but in a plain dark one. His shoulders sagged, his face was tired. The charm and bravado were gone. His lawyer asked the first question. "Mr. Combs, why are you choosing to testify today?" Diddy looked out at the jury, then briefly at his mother. "I heard my mom yesterday. Really heard her. And I realized I've been lying to myself for so long I almost believed it," he said, voice soft, almost shaky. My mother raised me better than the man I became. She taught me about respect, honesty, about doing right by people. But somewhere along the way, I lost that. His lawyer looked taken aback by the tone, but pressed on. Can you explain your understanding of the charges? I know what I'm charged with. Racketeering, sex trafficking, coercion, Diddy said. For years, I told myself it was just business, just how things work in the industry. I told myself everyone consented, everyone knew the game. But that wasn't the truth. He paused, eyes lowered. I built a world where people didn't feel safe to say no, where careers were held over their heads. I didn't just cross lines, I erased them. Destruction, public humiliation, financial ruin. These were the shadows hanging over every moment of Diddy's testimony. I didn't call it coercion, he said. I called it leverage, but it was wrong. As Diddy continued speaking, his voice low but clear, he described how success, wealth, and unchecked power had twisted his perception. He admitted to building a world where his desires came first, where staff, associates, and partners knew their job was to not only satisfy his demands, but to hide them. He spoke of NDAs, payoffs, threats, a whole system carefully crafted to keep victims silent. I convinced myself, he confessed, that if people took the money, accepted the deals, signed the contracts, then everything was consensual. I ignored the power imbalance that made true consent impossible. When asked about specific allegations from the victims who had testified earlier, Diddy didn't dodge. He confirmed much of what was said. Occasionally, he claimed his memory was foggy due to substance use. But even then, he didn't deny the general truth of their accounts. His attorney, clearly thrown off by a client veering far off the defense playbook, shifted to a critical moment. Janice Combs' testimony. Your mother described conversations where you essentially admitted to creating a system that exploited others. Was her recollection accurate? Diddy looked down, then slowly nodded. Yes, my mother has never lied to me or about me. She told the truth, he went on. When she visited me after my arrest, I told her those things. Back then, I was still justifying it all, telling myself that power came with its own rules. I couldn't or wouldn't see how wrong I was. As his direct testimony ended, the prosecutor stood for cross-examination. Her tone was firm but composed, careful not to interrupt the flow of what had become an unintentional confession. Mr. Combs, she said, you've described a system where consent was compromised by power, fear, and control. Are you aware that this aligns with the legal definition of the crimes you're charged with? Diddy didn't blink. Yes, I've had a lot of time to think since my arrest. I've studied the laws. I understand how they apply to what I did. And yet, she pressed, you initially pled not guilty. What changed? Diddy turned toward the gallery, the same place his mother had sat the day before, though her seat was now empty. Yesterday changed everything, he said. Hearing my mother speak the truth I've been denying for so long, it broke something open in me. The last thing I'd been holding on to was the belief that the people who really knew me would never see me the way the prosecution did. But my mother, she saw it. She said it. And I couldn't keep lying after that. The prosecutor then walked him step by step through the charges: racketeering, sex trafficking, coercion. With each count, Diddy's answers didn't defend, they confirmed. By the time cross-examination ended, he looked drained, defeated. He had walked into court a defendant and walked off the stand a man who had just helped prosecute himself. As he stepped down, the courtroom watched in stunned silence. Diddy paused briefly, as if he might speak again. But he didn't. He returned to the defense table quietly. The judge called for a short recess. Diddy remained seated, eyes forward, motionless. The man who had once been the embodiment of confidence, luxury, and control had just dismantled his empire. Not with an exposé, not with leaked documents, but with his own words. And then came the shock that no one saw coming. When the court reconvened, Diddy's attorneys requested a private conference with the judge and prosecution. After a 30-minute meeting behind closed doors, Judge Subramanian addressed the court. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I have been informed that the defendant wishes to change his plea." Gasps echoed in the gallery. Even the jurors looked surprised. The judge turned to Diddy and began the formal colloquy. Did he understand the rights he was giving up? The consequences of this decision? Diddy answered each question clearly, soberly. "No, Your Honor," he said when asked if he had been coerced. "This is my decision. After hearing my mother's testimony and reflecting on my actions, I can't keep denying responsibility." The judge accepted the plea. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In the gallery, victims who had bravely testified sat in quiet disbelief. Some held hands, some wept. The case that many expected to drag on for months had ended in a single day, because of a mother's truth and a son's finally facing it. Outside, media chaos erupted. Reporters rushed to capture reactions. Janice Combs, who had returned to witness her son's change of plea, made a brief but powerful statement. "Today is a difficult day, but it's also a necessary one. I love my son unconditionally. That will never change. But love without truth isn't love at all. I hope this is the beginning of healing for those he hurt and for our family." As Diddy was led from the courtroom in custody, his last public appearance before sentencing, he looked nothing like the mogul who had ruled music, fashion, and media. He looked like a man who had finally seen himself clearly and admitted the truth. When Sean "Diddy" Combs changed his plea to guilty, he didn't look like a man who had lost a court battle. He looked like a man who had finally stopped running. Even the judge, known for his poise, seemed momentarily shaken before regaining his composure. Jurors, now released, left in tears. And Diddy, for the first time since his arrest, looked unburdened, not absolved, but free from the weight of denial. He didn't speak to the press. He was taken into custody immediately. His legal team issued a short statement. "Mr. Combs has accepted responsibility for his actions. He asks for privacy for his family during this difficult time and expresses deep remorse to those he has harmed." But outside the courtroom, the world was only beginning to respond. The music industry, which had cautiously waited for due process, now faced the blunt force of Diddy's admission. Record labels issued statements condemning abuse. Artists distanced themselves, some shocked, others quietly admitting they'd heard rumors for years. Emergency meetings were held. Contracts reviewed. Collaborations canceled. The public started connecting dots. Old interviews resurfaced. Insider comments about how things worked suddenly sounded damning. Photos and videos from industry parties were reanalyzed under a new chilling lens. Most importantly, more victims began coming forward, not just from Diddy's circle, but from across the entertainment world. This wasn't just about one man anymore. This was about a culture. Fans reacted with heartbreak, guilt, and anger. Many asked why it took a mother's voice to break the silence. Others admitted they had ignored the signs for too long. Celebrity worship was starting to fracture, and then came sentencing. 6 weeks later, Janice Combs was seated in the front row again. This time, she didn't speak. She listened, alongside. The court, as victim after victim described what Diddy had taken from them. Careers, trust, confidence, peace. Then Diddy rose to speak one last time. "I want to apologize to everyone I've hurt. To the women who trusted me, and whose trust I betrayed. To the colleagues and employees I dragged into this. To my children, who now have to live with what I did. And to my mother, who taught me better." He paused, his voice steady but stripped of all bravado. "I can't undo the harm I caused. I can only acknowledge it.